A hush had settled beneath the great stone vault of the twins. The hush that comes when revelry teeters on the lip of violence and no one yet names the warning aloud. It was the quiet between harp strings, between the clatter of knives that slowed upon trenchers slick with gravy and fat. Somewhere a lute gave up its final, plaintive chord, and the hush rippled outward like a pebble dropped into black water. Robb Stark felt it in the pit of his gut before he tasted it on the air, a prickle of winter where only summer wine should have lingered. He lifted his goblet, more from habit than thirst, and caught the tremor of the candles in the draught. Catelyn turned her head, auburn hair slipping from its pins, and her eyes met his. She knew the soundlessness too. She had lived long enough in Winterfell's crypt-still nights to recognize the note of absence. No roaring hearth, no muttered blasphemy from a drunk soldier. Nothing but a silvery cold, seeping up through rushes and boards, coiling in her blood. Then the doors boomed shut behind the musicians. The note shattered, and the hall cracked open on nightmare. Crossbow strings thrummed. Bolts shrieked. Drunken bodies jerked upright, too slow, tangled in benches and spilled trenchers. Robb saw the fletching before he felt the strike. With pierced mail, snapped against his ribs, and the world narrowed to his mother's cry. Another bolt hammered through his shoulder with a sound like splitting ice. He staggered, tasting steel, and reached for gray wind, only to remember the direwolf had been penned outside. Around him the Northmen reeled, cut down by Freys whose smiles showed in the torchlight like wet ivory. Talisa gasped beside him, blood blooming on the silk over her belly. Robb roared, but his voice cracked on blood, and Fry laughter swallowed the sound. He fell. Talisa's hand slipped from his, droplets pattering on the stone like rain on a tomb. Someone screamed her name. Maybe him, maybe Catelyn. It did not matter. The hush returned, thicker now, a muffling snow. In the stillness that followed, Walder Frey's voice wagged like a dog's tail. Leave them. Leave the corpses. They'll keep till the morrow. But the morrow did not come in warmth. Came in frost. Midnight over the Green Fork brought no moon, only a pallid veil across the stars. The first rider on the night wind was silence. A silence truer than sleep, edged with distant thunder that rolled yet never burst. The second rider was cold. Not autumn's bite, nor winter's honest chill, but a cold that tasted of rotted grave clay and old promises kept in darkness. Walder Frey's guards felt it first. A mist crawled from the river, veining through the reeds and over the flagstones. It clung to beards, bristled on eyelashes, froze words in throats. A torch sputtered, hissed, and died, its smoke snatched upward as though drawn by hungry lungs. The guards cursed, stamping feet, banging sword hilts against the frost that spider-webbed their scabbards. Across the Bailey dogs whined, ears flattened to skulls, eyes rolling white. The wind spoke, but in a tongue no living man had right to hear. The corpse of Robb Stark heard it nonetheless. Where he lay upon the rushes, the blood in his veins stiffened, then flowed backward, drawn toward a new heart forged of ice. Cold stitched flesh where the quarrels had torn. His eyes opened. They held no pupils, no warmth, only mirrors for an endless night. Elsewhere, Catelyn's throat, still raw from the blade that had cut it to the bone, closed itself, knitting a scream that would never find air. Talisa's fingers twitched, nails raking stone. Outside, horses stamped and reared until their bellies split and steaming clouds birthed from ruptured guts. Men shouted, but the fog swallowed the sound, and in the hush between one heartbeat and the next, the gates groaned wide of their own accord. He walked within. A tall shape, blacker than the night behind him, crowned by a helm wrought of hoarfrost, spear tip shining like a shard of fallen star. The Night King. His eyes blazed cerulean, burning without warmth or mercy, and his steps rang secret chords across the bridge stone. A guard lunged with pike butt, trembling but defiant. The Night King did not parry. He brushed the iron aside, frost blooming along the haft, splitting wood with a soft crackle. The guard's arm went numb. The flesh grayed, stiffened, then shattered when he swung again, elbow snapping like brittle glass. Walder Frey's curses died in his throat. He huddled behind a table, wine sloshing, fat hands shaking. "Mercy," he whispered, to gods he had never feared. But mercy had no warrant within the Night King's dominion. Ice crept across Walder's lungs, century-old sins freezing in place, and he fell soundlessly onto the platter of pheasant he had not finished. Within the great hall the dead rose. Steel scraped stone as Northmen and Riverlanders alike shambled upright, eyes gone blue and blind. The newly slain moved first, but soon older bones clawed out from beneath benches, from middens heaped beyond the walls, from the cold silt of the riverbank where forgotten thralls had drowned long before the Freys claimed their bridge. Every corpse answered, every corpse obeyed. Robb Stark's gaze swept across his mother, his wife, the rows of men who had followed him south. If memory lingered, it lay caged behind frost. He lifted a sword, a stranger's blade, and its edge glinted with pale fire unlit by torch or hearth. The Night King raised an arm. The once king of winter fell into step. Dawn did not come to the twins. The sky remained a leaden vault, bruised and streaked with aurorae like wounds that refused to close. From the parapets, a lone sentry saw the host that filled the western bank. A sea of figures, slow yet relentless, and at their head a banner of dire wolf and trout, stitched in rhyme and flapping in a wind whispering of empty graves. He raised the alarm, but his words turned to vapor in larynx half-frozen. When he stumbled backward, the mist rolled over him and he was lost, voice, flesh, and soul together. South along the Green Fork, Ser Brynden Tully rode hard, cloak snapping behind him. His horse steamed beneath him, lungs rasping, but the Blackfish would not slow. Behind him drifted rumors, torches snuffed, gates ajar, ravens that froze upon the wing and fell like stones. He had left Catelyn's letter unopened at Riverrun, trusting to his sister's sense for doom. Now dread rode the saddle with him, whispering that he was already too late. At Moat Cailin, ravens perched uneasy upon the mossy towers, eyes bright as chips of sky. Their cries woke no garrison, for the garrison lay slack-jawed at their posts, skin glazed with frost. In the north, Jon Snow paced atop the wall, a restless shadow in black wool. He too felt the hush, the breath before a scream, and when he peered south he saw nothing yet, only the darkness thickening beyond sight like tide against the shore. Farther east, Melisandre stirred in her tent beneath Dragonstone's chill rain. A coal dimmed to ash upon her brazier, but its smoke curled crimson, forming a river of blood down which floated small boats fashioned of bone. The flames told no lies. The wall would be leagues too short if the storm rose unchecked. She tasted death on the wind, and it tasted of roses wilted black by frost. The rose of House Tyrell, the rose once pinned to Renly's corpse, the rose that now might bloom no more. In King's Landing, a messenger reached the Red Keep, face blanched like parchment. He carried no letter, only horror behind his eyes. But Tywin Lannister, Hand and Regent, did not heed second-hand terrors. He spoke of coin, of alliances, of salt and bread broken. The wall, he reminded his small council, had stood 8,000 years. Dragons had flown, kings had bled, yet the stories of dead men walking remained stories, a child's tale to scare the credulous. That night, in the heart of the royal crypts, the bones of Aegon the Conqueror rattled faintly against obsidian clamps. The Night King marched. He did not hurry. The earth would come to him in time. Along the riverbanks poultry froze in coops, and orchards cracked, sap crystallizing into daggers that carved bark from living trunks. Where the dead passed, the world shed its color. Grass bleached, air dimmed, sky bruised. Faint luminescence coruscated above the host, pale green and violet ribbons sliding like serpents across a starless dome. The white that had been Robb Stark spoke no words, yet sometimes his sword arm lifted in a gesture that once meant rally or charge. The men behind him answered in silence, smashing through thickets, trampling hedgerows. They bled ice. Steel rang upon their bones like hammers on anvil, but they did not tire. At Seaguard, Lord Jason Mallister closed his gates, mustered crossbowmen along crenellations dusted by frost. He had not fought the dead before, yet he remembered Greyjoy longships and new sea raiders did not break upon first sortie. Still he hoped. Hope lasted until dawn, when the sun failed to breach the horizon. The sky remained wolf-gray, and on that dim horizon rose shapes without number. Mallister's archers loosed by the thousands. Black-fletched shafts hissed down, snapped bone, pinned bodies to earth that quaked beneath stamping hooves. Yet the wights climbed the shafts as though they were ladder rungs, hauling their broken forms onward. Some fell to pieces, torsos detaching from hips, crawling still. When the corpses reached the moat, they slipped into the black water unaided. The dead did not breathe, and the moat was no barrier. They emerged slick and glistening, water freezing to crystal plates across their limbs, and pressed against the walls. Lord Mallister ordered pitch poured, torches cast down. Flames whooshed, smoke climbed. The dead burned, but they burned without sound. A pyre of mannequins. Yet behind them came more, clambering atop charred remnants. Mid-morning's dimness turned to twilight, and still the ladders of corpses mounted. By dusk, Seaguard's gates buckled inward beneath a wedge of wights welded together by congealed blood. The first to enter was a stag knight in rusting plate, eyes verdigris blue. The second was a girl with black braid, once a washerwoman. The third wore a crown of wolf's teeth and moved upon legs that spurted frozen ichor where crossbow bolts had severed tendons. When night deepened, Mallister stood on the keep roof, bastard sword in hand, watching his banners fall one by one. He felt no fear then, only awe at the magnitude of ending. He leapt before the dead could claim him, but cold hands closed upon his ankle mid-plunge, dragging him into an embrace of frost. He would rise before dawn, another mouthless soldier in the Night King's vanguard. And still the march did not hasten. It did not need to. In Riverrun Solar, Bryn Den Tully listened to refugees who babbled of winter come alive. They spoke of robins frozen mid-flight, of infants stolen from cradles by shadows, of a river that ran solid as black iron overnight, entombing fish that slapped useless tails beneath the glaze until they stilled. The blackfish closed his eye. One of them had gone milky white from an arrow years past, and tasted again the hush that had haunted him since he fled the twins. He knew its name now, despair. Edmure wept quietly in his cell the next tower over. He wept for Roslyn, for the babe in her belly, for the father-in-law who had bartered them all for vengeance. When Bryn Den entered, his nephew scrubbed his face and tried a smile. "My uncle," he greeted, voice as thin as the dawn light. But Bryn Den had no comfort to offer. "Steel yourself," he said. "We ride for the Vale by moonrise. Riverrun is no moat against such flood." "Moonrise," Edmure echoed, sorrow giving way to dread. "The moon has not shone in days." Outside, the river murmured, muffled beneath a skin of crystal as clear and thick as mountain quartz. Beyond the wall, in a cave of weirwood roots, Bran Stark gasped. His head lolled, eyes rolling back into a field of snow. He saw the march in tapestry vision, lines of dark swathing the map of Westeros, converging where rivers forked like veins toward a heart. He felt the cold press against his own pulse, though he sat beside a warm fire. Hodder held him tight, whispering comforts the big man scarcely understood, and Bran's breath steamed. Bloodraven spoke gently, though his words rang like iron. "It moves faster than tales told by hearth and hill. The dead do not barter, Brandon. They do not pause to parley." Bran thought of Robb's letters, the oath of kingship sealed with gray wax. He thought of Catelyn's lullabies, Talisa's gentle hands. Memory scalded. He tried to stand, but roots snared his ankles, and the cave ceiling seemed to lower, pressing him down. "What must I do?" Bran whispered. "Look," said the three-eyed raven, skin brittle as birch. "Look until the looking changes the world." So Bran looked. He saw the twins again, but now the hall lay sheathed in rime. Wights advanced upon each new keep like floodwater, engorged by tributaries of corpses. He saw his mother, face slashed, hair flowing loose, yet alive in some wrong way, fighting beneath the Night King's banner. He tried to reach out, "Mother!" but the vision receded into storm cloud. When he blinked, the cave returned, but colder. A single snowflake drifted from the ceiling and melted on his palm. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon paced the ramparts, cloak snapping in a wind that hissed from the north, though Dragonstone's storms blew east by rights. Davos Seaworth limped beside him, rubbing knuckles to ward off stiffness. "Your Grace," Davos ventured. "The Night's Watch calls banners. Their ravens claim the dead march upon the living." Stannis stopped at a crenel and looked seaward toward a sky that flickered not with lightning but with an eerie green flame. "Dead men," he muttered as though tasting the words. "I have seen dead men." He recalled the beach at Storm's End where Sellis brothers had washed up white and bloated after a gale. He remembered Renly's smile as it faded into slack horror beneath a shadow's blade. "Dead men are silent, Onion Knight. They do not raise keeps." Davos hesitated, wanting to mention rumors of the Onion fleet found crusted in ice near the harbor mouth. Men frozen at oars, eyes blue as winter roses. But he said only, "Melisandre reads portents in her fires." "Let her read," Stannis rasped. "When the wall falls, we will know soon enough." At that same hour, the Red Woman watched flames coil behind Blackstone Hearth. She saw a banner of red hearts skewered by ice spears, saw a stag kneeling in hoarfrost, and heard the hiss of distant weeping. She laid a hand upon her womb and whispered a prayer, though whether for salvation or conquest she herself did not know. The Night King reached the Blackwater Rush before the moon returned. The river lay wide and deep, yet its surface cracked beneath the first wight to step upon it. Cracks webbed outward, seized by a breath of wind so cold it whistled through the frost, and the entire span froze solid. The dead crossed as though upon flagstone. Ahead, King's Landing's walls bristled with torches whose flames guttered as the cold advanced. Within the Red Keep, panic skittered along every corridor. Small folk fled toward the Dragon Pit, hoping stone domes might shield them, but the Dragon Pit was broken long before. It leaked history like blood through old bandage. Gold cloaks tried to muster, but their armor bit flesh where frost blurred metal edges white. Cersei Lannister stood upon her balcony, goblet of wine clenched too tightly. Red rivulets trickled over her knuckles. She watched the pale host shimmer beyond the city and wondered whether prophecy felt like this. A hush before the candle snuffs. A tick of the heart stretched across eternity. Far below, Qyburn studied a severed hand delivered by the last Black brother to reach the capital. The fingers twitched within its jar of vinegar brine, nails scratching glass. He scrawled notes, speculation on animating force and necromantic humors. Never mind that frost now rhymed the jar and crawled across parchment. Knowledge would be the key, he told himself, as his quill cracked in numb fingers. Knowledge survives. In the Tower of the Hand, Tywin held audience with Grand Maester Pycelle and Ser Meryn Trant. He listened to Pycelle's wheeze about ancient legends, about the Long Night and Azor Ahai, and when Pycelle finished, Tywin gestured for silence that carried authority sharper than any blade. "Legends," he said, voice flat. "Do not breach walls." Outside, the whites reached the mud gate. They did not crash upon it. They pressed, ranks piling until the living wood groaned and hinges shrieked under a weight no siege engine could replicate. Arrows hissed down, but whites simply shouldered those pierced bodies aside. The cold alone felled more men than arrows, seeping through mail like a whisper. Atop the ramparts, Jaime Lannister hefted a spear in his remaining hand. He had not used one since the Whispering Wood, but a spear required thrust more than finesse. Down below, shapes jostled in the gloom, eyes glittering azure. One looked up, a Northman with tousled curls of black and a crown of ice. Robb Stark. Recognition stunned Jaime. His arm faltered. In that pause, the white leapt, impaled itself upon the spear point, yet kept climbing. Jaime cursed, driving the shaft deeper, but the weight dragged him forward. Hands grabbed the parapet. Ser Ilyn Payne, silent as ever, hacked twice, severing both head and arm. The parts fought still until Payne's second blow crushed skull. The gate shuddered, A creek rose, the groan of ancient timbers parting. Then a hollow stillness. It was the hush again. Jaime heard it at Whispering Wood, just before stark banners rose in every quarter. He heard it at the September of Baylor before wildfire lit green sunsets. Each time it spelled doom. On its heels came a note of purest ice. The mud gate burst. Far to the west, Arya Stark huddled in a hayloft at the inn at the crossroads, nursing a frostbitten toe and a burn across her arm from a hearth flame that had flared blue without warning. Gendry tended her as best he knew, wrapping the limb in strips torn from his cloak, but nothing eased the cold that sank beneath skin. Hot Pie had barricaded the doors with sacks of flour, claiming the dead feared bread. Arya almost laughed until she remembered the hush. "You feel it too," Gendry murmured. Arya nodded, teeth chattering. "It's like waiting for father to speak, when you know he's angry." Gendry snorted. "I never had a father like that, Arya." "Then you're lucky," she said, though she did not believe it. Hoofs pounded outside. Arya crawled to the shutter and peeked. A column of riders approached, torches blazing. The standard was a white sunburst on field of crimson. Lady Melisandre rode at their head, her hair unbound, eyes lit like coals. Behind came men half-armored, cloaks too thin for such cold, but they rode with purpose. Arya's breath caught. She did not trust the Red Woman, but fire followed her, and fire stood against night. Arya slipped from the loft, blade in hand, as the door burst inward. She expected red witchery, but instead found Beric Dondarrion, breathing hard, sword wreathed in dull embers. Come Beric barkt. Winter walks with no feet, and daylight hides. We ride to meet it with fire. Arya's heart pounded. She looked back at Gendry, who nodded. She tucked needle into her belt, seized a torch, and followed. On the wall, Jon Snow met Sam's wide eyes. Ghost paced the parapet, hackles like bleached spears. Below, in the courtyard, RD, boys too young to shave, fumbled arrows with fingers blue. Jon's breath smoked white as snowdrifts. "The ravens?" he asked. "None returned," Sam croaked. Jon glanced northward. The forest stood silent, but the hush lay upon it like a shroud. "Then they come," he said. He looked south, toward the far horizon where the sky flickered. "And not from one side alone."
Sam swallowed.
"I've read the old scrolls. The long night lasted a generation." Jon thought of Ygritte's laughter, of old Nan's tales, of a feast in Winterfell's hall when summer seemed endless. A generation. "Then we fight until the dawn returns," he said. "If it takes our lives, we give them." At his side, Dolorous Ed muttered, "That's the spirit."
Die gloriously, fries ingloriously.
Jon smiled without humor. "Prepare the barrels," he told them. "Drag them to every tower, every stair. Light the pyres at first sight of blue eyes." As he spoke, a horn sounded 3 blasts.
Sames knees buckled.
Jon's hand flew to Longclaw. They both knew what 3 blasts meant. The wall had not heard it since the Age of Legends. Rangers returning? It offered Hope Hollow.
"No," Jon whispered.
The others. King's Landing burned. Wildfire stored since Aerys' reign spilled from cracked kegs when wagons overturned in the crush to flee. Green flames gushed like venom, igniting straw roofs, setting night ablaze with emerald glare. But even wildfire's heat could not melt the hush, and soon green flames guttered beneath breath so cold it drowned their fury. The Night King advanced through hail of molten stone from trebuchets atop Maegor's holdfast. Rubble glanced his shoulders, shattering to powder against his frozen cuirass. Beside him stalked a direwolf white, frost crystals bristling across its gray pelt. When the beast howled, the sound curdled air, and men's hearts cracked like breaking ice. Lannister spears met the dead at the gate of the gods. Ser Adam Marbrand led the charge, torch in one hand, longsword in the other. He cut 2 whites down, spilled guts that steamed against his greaves, but a third clamped icy jaws around his throat. Fire guttered from his torch onto its face. Flesh melted from bone, yet the jaws clenched tighter. Marbrand's scream ended in a wet rasp, and he fell, blood freezing where it spurted. Cersei watched from a balcony high above, goblet shattered at her feet, crimson pooling about bare toes. She felt nothing now, not even fear. Below, her son Tommen wept, calling for his mother. She gathered him, pressed lips to golden hair, and whispered lullabies her own mother once sang before plague ferried her away. She would not let Tommen wear chains of ice or burn in wildfire. She reached for nightshade that Maester Pycelle had hidden for such moments. Then the hush lifted, and a roar like twin dragons shook the sky. From the east, flames tore the cloud bank, and a shape vast as myth swooped low, wings churning smoke. Dragonfire spilled across the dead like dawn reborn. The Night King raised a hand and frost rose in barrier, ice meeting fire in shrieking hiss, sending clouds of steam whirling. Upon the dragon's back Daenerys Targaryen leaned forward, silver hair crackling with updraft, eyes narrowed against sleet. Drogon roared again. Fire met ice, and the hush shattered. The battle for King's Landing would rage for days, though sun never climbed beyond horizon. Men spoke later of nights without end, of green flames wrestling blue, of dragons flying beneath rainbows of stark aurora. Some swore they saw Lord Eddard Stark himself upon the battlements, grim as winter, sword weeping frost as he struck at shades who wore his children's faces. Others claimed Stannis Baratheon rode through breach, sword blazing red, Melisandre's chants twining the smoke, and that dead things shrank from him as from the dawn. But all tales agreed on the hush, that terrible breathless stillness preceding each wave, a pause where hearts ceased and hope flickered like guttering wicks. When hush fell, everyone listened for footfalls of advancing death, listened for leathern wings of salvation, and prayed to gods old and new that their end would be swift. In the far north of memory, Bran Stark opened eyes fogged by tears of ice. He saw the hush at its source, a canyon of black glass where two rivers met, the exact fork where first men spilled blood upon weirwood roots and awoke vengeance in stone. He saw a heartbeat earlier than hush, the moment a hand of bone touched soil and commanded grave to yield. He saw the Night King's face before blue flame burnt away humanity, saw the echo of vows spoken in a tongue lost to time. He tried to reach, to whisper words older still, but every branch of the future bent beneath dead weight. Only one path glimmered, fire wedded to light. He saw 3 heads of dragon, yet one head wept, one raged, and one lay silent beneath snow. He saw steel dark as midnight forged anew in flame far hotter than dragon breath. And he saw the hush break like dawn when that steel found the Night King's heart. So the world balanced on hush, the pause between pulse and silence, blade and sheath, life and death. In that pause armies marched, loyalties burned, and children grew old without dawn. Somewhere beyond the far horizon, a crow called thrice. The hush listened. Then, very softly, it began to crack. The roar of Drogon's fire faded into a hiss of steam where it met the Night King's wall of frost, and the city beyond seethed with clashing temperatures like a forge plunged into snowmelt. Vapor rolled through Flea Bottom's alleys, thick as battlefield smoke, and small folk stumbled sightless amid fissuring cobbles that rang under invisible hammers of thermal shock. Windows cracked in spiderweb patterns. Whole facades sloughed away as mortar crumbled. Between those falling stones, the dead surged, relentless, their blue eyes shining through the mist like stars glimpsed from the bottom of a well. Daenerys pressed her knees to Drogon's shoulders and felt the great muscles bunch beneath scaled hide. Every gout of flame cost him, she knew, yet to bank the fire was to surrender sky to the Winter King below. She had faced slavers, Kartha's warlocks, and the treachery of Meereen, but never an enemy that would not burn. Valyrian blood ran hot in her veins. Cold defied the very story of her birth, and yet the Night King's chill weighed upon her shoulders as though her own flesh remembered the winter of the world before the coming of the first men. "Again," she whispered. Drogon angled his wings, banking hard. Air thundered past Daenerys's ears, braids whipping across her cheeks. Below, the Night King stood ankle-deep in a growing sea of melted stone and refrozen slag, spear raised. the blade catching every stray spark and turning each to a needle of ice. Fire poured from Drogon's jaws, amber, crimson, molten, until street and corpse and toppled cart became a single incandescent torrent. The torrent struck the Night King's spear, split like a river around a standing stone, and fountained skyward in two prongs of blinding light. When the glare subsided, the Night King remained, rhymed but unbroken, frost feathers wafting from his pauldrons. Ser Jorah watched from a tower slit, heart hammering, every instinct torn between leaping to Daenerys' aid and knowing his own frail hands could do nothing but tighten upon Heartsbane's leather grip. Beside him, Missandei of Noth counted heartbeats in Valyrian under her breath as though prayer were mathematics that might, if recited perfectly, summon solution. On the floor beneath them, a dozen unsullied braced shields against the stairwell, spears leveled at the dark below. Faint scrapes echoed up from the gloom. Claws or armor, Jorah could not tell. And in that echo nested the hush, the same hush that had preceded every horror this night. "Leave this tower," Missandei urged. "You must reach her. 2 men can row a skiff to Drogon's landing platform. If she must come down." "There is no landing," Jorah said, eyes fixed on the skyborn duel. "Not while that thing stands." Missandei's voice fell to a whisper. "Then she must strike the spear." Across the courtyard, the mountain cohort of the Unsullied advanced in phalanx toward the Gate of the Gods, shields interlocked. Grey Worm walked point, helm plumed with the faintest drift of frost. The first rank met a tide of whites, and the corridor between walls rang with iron on ice. Spears punched through ribcages, the shove so precise that shafts never stuck. Points withdrew in perfect rhythm. Yet every corpse felled opened a space for 3 more. The cohort gave ground a step at a time, heels skidding on black ice that thickened by the breath. Grey Worm barked orders, voice hoarse with cold, and the formation pivoted into a crescent to keep flanks from fold. But the line contracted, and with each contraction the hush pressed closer, until each man felt as though he fought within a tomb closing with invisible mortar. Above the gate, Jaime Lannister hauled a barrel to the parapet with his one good hand. Its rope burned his palm. Tar seeped across his knuckles. He wrestled the lid off with his stump wedged against the rim, then tipped the barrel. Viscous pitch slithered across the merlons, dripping toward the swarm below. A torch lay at his feet, sputtering, its flame a mere candle in the gale of cold air. He snatched it up just as a dead man vaulted the battlement at his right. One swipe of the torch sent the white shrieking back over the wall, trailing liquid flame that burnt blue where it should have burned gold. Jaime hurled the torch after, and the pitch caught, blossoming into a waterfall of fire that chewed through the dead in a sluice of bubbling death. For a moment, the hush receded, driven off by roar and crackle and the shrieks of igniting flesh. Jaime allowed himself a thin grin. Then the fire dimmed, devoured by cold faster than pitch could feed it. What remained on the ground were half-burned corpses that yet crawled. Jaime cursed, seized another barrel, and shouted for more men. None answered. The parapet behind him lay deserted save for a single, boneless figure slumped against the crenellation. Ser Meryn Trant, cheeks ashen, lungs frozen in mid-scream. Jaime's grin died. Tar or no tar, the wall would hold only if men held it. Beneath the Red Keep, Qyburn's laboratory rattled like a cage of kettledrums. Chains danced upon iron rings, glassware chimed. Cersei Lannister stood on the threshold, white gown ruffled by drafts so cold they mimicked hands. "Speak," she hissed. Qyburn worked a crank on the slab where Ser Gregor's immense form was strapped. The mountain's blue lips peeled back, revealing teeth stained with black ichor. Tubes leached fluid from the giant's chest, each drop sizzling where it struck the stone floor. "My queen," Qyburn said. "Fire alone will not suffice. Heat must be wed to life." He gestured at a cage in which a terrified raven beat icy bars with its wings. Its eyes gleamed blue. Cersei approached reluctantly, as though the air itself might seize her. "You will make me such creatures?" "Not make, convert," Qyburn corrected. "Your brother claims the slain rise. Then let us rise them with loyalty instead of malice." Loyalty, Cersei echoed, and her gaze drifted across the chamber to a second slab where Pycelle's corpse lay half-dressed, wounds stitched. When she looked back, her eyes shone with a mania almost as bright as the raven's. Above ground, Tywin Lannister strode through the throne room where refugees huddled beneath broken tapestries for warmth. His presence parted them like a prow cutting chill seas. He mounted the Iron Throne dais, surveyed the ruin of his city, and weighed each flicker of torchlight against cost and benefit. When Ser Kevan arrived, helm rhymed with frost. Tywin said only, "The wildfire reserves? Spent, my lord, each vault breached by cold." The flames died before they found air. Tywin closed his eyes. He heard the hush now, heard it inside his own heartbeat, a silence too large for vessels or nerve. It was the silence his father's voice had once filled when speaking of Hoster Tully's insults. The silence that came before a Lannister debt was paid. Fine, he thought. Let it roar. He opened his eyes. Send every rider under Lannister banner north. We need allies who still breathe. He said nothing of how many allies might remain south of the Neck. The Neck itself had become a wasteland of steaming marsh pools rimmed by centimeters of clear ice. Reed huts sagged under frost so heavy they pitched entire stilts into muck that had frozen before the pilings could settle. Mira and Jojen Reed, paddling a small skin boat, felt their paddles bite surface tension as though striking glass. Far off, the howl of wind carried a hint of screaming iron, and with it the hush, as though the wind itself obeyed a greater order of quiet. "We cannot turn back," Jojen whispered, clutching the canoe's rim as his lips cracked. "Only through sorrow may joy return. The Greenseers showed me the cost." Mira's hands bled on the paddle, but she forced one more stroke. "We find the Blackfish at Moat Cailin or we die. Those are our rivers to choose." Behind them, in the boat's stern, a bundle of branched weirwood twigs lay cradling 3 glass candles. One green, one black, one white. Bran's gift, delivered by ravens who had plucked words from his dreaming. Jojen's blood dotted the white candle already, an offering given freely to keep the flame alive. The other 2 candles awaited their kindling, but each time Mira opened the satchel, the flames guttered on oilcloth as though preferring slumber to light. Ahead, gray towers rose. What remained of ancient watch keeps now glazed in ice so thick the stones beneath cracked. A single banner fluttered, silver trout on red-blue field. Relief surged through Mira. Then a second banner came into view, drooping from a hastily affixed staff. It bore 3 wolf heads gnawing their own tails and ringing a white circle. Jojen gasped, recognizing the sigil Bran had described in Dream, the mark of the new dead. As the canoe scraped frozen mud, Mira leapt ashore. Bodies lay in the moat, some wearing Tully blue, others cloaked in Fry gray. All bore eyes the color of summer sky on the coldest day. Yet none moved. Sweat prickled her neck despite the bitter air. "They're waiting," she breathed. "Not waiting," Jojen corrected, voice shivering. "Listening. They are part of the hush." A horn sounded. A single steady note drawn from a tower window where a figure in black waved a lantern scarlet as heart's blood. The Blackfish. He pointed east, toward a break in the Causeway woods, then vanished behind Crenels. Mira pulled Jojen up the battered causeway, boots crunching over frozen weeds. Something in the hush altered as they passed. The bodies' heads turned, jaws yawning wider than sinew should allow, yet no moan issued, only silence. Then, as if the hush itself decided to break, one corpse lunged. Mira spitted it through the throat with a frog spear. The spear stuck, ice welding shaft to flesh. She kicked the body back, wrenching the weapon free amid shards of frost and sinew. The corpse stumbled. 3 more rolled to their feet. Mira grabbed Jojen's elbow and sprinted. The gate yawned just long enough for them to slip through before slamming with a hollow clang. On the parapet above, arrow slits flashed and fell whites toppled to the moat again like felled posts on a frozen river. Inside the walls, Ser Brynden Tully met them with cheeks frothed white by cold. His single good eye had turned watery. "Tell your dream," he ordered without preamble. Jojen, shaking, revealed the glass candles. Brinden looked upon them as though they were the crown of a long-lost king who might yet command broken armies. "Fire that is not flame," the Blackfish muttered. "We may have one chance to light them, child, but it will draw his gaze." He nodded toward the piles of corpses beyond the wall. "Prepare." South of the city, Arya Stark rode bareback on a courser stolen from a burning stable. Beric's band galloped ahead, flaming swords raised, the orange glow leaving streaks upon the night. The hush preceded them, sliding beneath hoofbeats so that each pounding thud seemed to strike muffled ground. Arya felt the hush in her own lungs. Breath shallower, heartbeats stretched. Her fingers whitened on the reins. The road to King's Landing burned with columns of refugees fleeing the city. Merchants, thieves, septas, sellswords who had fought for coin they no longer valued. They parted for Beric's company, some falling to knees to beg deliverance, some clawing at the riders to beg seats. Whites harried them, dead mothers clutching swaddled infants, bakers with arms charred as they had tried to shield ovens, gold cloaks still wearing half-melted helms. Beric's riders hacked through each wave, leaving pyres of half-burnt flesh that guttered moments later when cold closed around the embers. Sandor Clegane, face half-eaten by fire, half-frozen by cold, rode beside Arya on a warhorse snatched from a corpse. "You see your pretty king in there?" he growled above the wind. Arya's teeth chattered when she spoke. "My king is dead. Then maybe you'll find him walking." The hound spat, saliva turning to white vapor before it struck his chin. "And if he tries to hug you, run." Arya pressed her knee into her mount's flank, pushing forward. Flames reflected orange in her eyes. Needle was sheathed, but in her gloved hand she clasped a strange dagger Beric had given her. A sliver of black glass napped along one edge. "Obsidian kills them," Beric had said, voice rasping around charred lungs. "So do the old steels if the steel is lit with fire, Valyrian or elf-forged as some call it. But obsidian is older still, older than Hush." She had not asked what Hush was. She would rather fight than name dread. They crested a rise and looked upon King's Landing, or what lay in place of city. Half the walls smoldered, the other half gleamed like cliffs of hoarfrost. Drogon circled above, tails of flame spiraling from his jaws, but each blast met blizzards of cold conjured by White Walkers who clung to rooftops, spears lifted like lances aimed at the sun. Dragon Song and the Hush combined into something that buzzed behind the eyes. Terror and hope fused into one migraine of noise that contained no sound. Beric drew rein, surveyed. "We ride for the September light what fires we can. Draw them to holy ground and burn them with their blasphemy." "Blasphemy?" Sandor scoffed, but no one laughed. Flame blossomed on Beric's sword. He drove his mount down the slope and the Brotherhood followed, Arya at his flank. The Hush waited. In the crypts beneath Winterfell, the dead stirred. Rickon Stark slept fitfully in a disused corridor. Shaggy Dog curled about him. Osha the wildling kept watch, spear across her lap. The Hush drifted through the stone like mist through reeds. Osha felt it before she heard the first rattling of iron links. Chainmail clacked deep within the tomb labyrinth. Dust shivered from archways older than the kings of Winter's oldest bones. Shaggy Dog's hackles rose. The direwolf growled, low and drawn. Osha pressed palm to the pup's flank to steady him, then rose. The spear felt too light in her trembling hands. She thought of Maester Luwin's stories of Nymeria's flight across the sea, of Valyria's doom. None had prepared her for bones waking under stone. She recognized the hush, the valley's stillness before avalanche, the moor's silence when white shadow crossed moonlight, death approaching. When she rounded the bend, she saw first one figure, then a dozen. Kings who had rested in peace 10 centuries stood now at solemn attention, icy swords drawn. Their eyes were pits of blue-glowing memory. They marched in ordered ranks, as though answering a muster called before even the Starks had names. The first in line wore a crown of stone wolf heads, and snow dusted his beard, though no snow could reach this place. Osha backed away. Spears and stone crowns alike meant little to restless dead. But the hush paused when it met Shaggy Dog's growl. The kings halted, swords raised, eyes fixed on the pup. Osha's breath halted. For a moment, one heartbeat long, the hush vibrated like a plucked string. Then the kings shifted, pivoting in silent unison to the north, toward stairways leading to surface night. They marched up, leaving Osha shaking, Rickon stirring from slumber. "Where they going?" Rickon mumbled, half dreaming. Osha knelt, pressed forehead to his. "To war, little one. Maybe to save us, maybe to bury us. Either way, we stay hidden." Above ground, direwolves howled across northern fields, the chorus so loud it silenced the hush and left the air ringing with echoes of a world before the dead walked. On the wall's crest, Jon Snow felt ice crystals burn his lashes. He had watched the Night's Watch repel 3 assaults. First from north as expected, second from south when Whites climbed rope ladders into the rear, and now a third crashing from east along the switchback stairs. At his command, Mafalon barrels of pitch had been lit, tipped, and burst into fiery cataracts that briefly sealed each breach with liquid flame. But every flame's lifetime diminished as cold thickened. Jon saw even the fire's color change, shading from orange to pallid yellow, then to blue before guttering. He felt time's rope fray. "Light more," he shouted, but Dolorous Ed threw up gloved hands. "We've naught left but lamp oil and curses, and the curses freeze in the mouth." Sam stumbled to his side, face ashen. The ravens still refuse. They peck at their cages as if the hush deafens them. Jon gripped Longclaw. Frost now silvered the Valyrian steel, chasing the rippled sigils along fuller lines. "Open the cages," he ordered. "If they fly, they fly. If they die, we make arrows."
Sam bokt.
"Arrows?" Jon's smile was bleak.
Feathers, Sam.
A horn blasted thrice again, this time from South Gate level, where a single brother waved a lantern through swirling snow. "Reinforcements," he cried. Jon squinted. Southward, beyond the shadows of Castle Black's lower spurs, he saw torches, hundreds, cresting the rise. At their head, a stag banner unfurled, edges rimed white. He recognized the silhouette of the man beneath. Stannis Baratheon, sword upraised, blades red-gold glow licking furnace hues across the gloom. Beneath the king rode knights of the queen's men, each bearing their own brazier of ropes spun with pitch and tallow. And behind those men marched ranks of Sellswords gripping iron-braced shields that glowed warm. They had been heated in charcoal braziers, until they radiated like coins fresh from forge. When the host reached the gate, Jon's brothers hauled chains, wheels groaning. As portcullis rose, Jon leapt down rungs, boots skidding on ice-sheathed wood, and met Stannis in the bailey. The king dismounted, jaw frosted, eyes glittering with something fierce and devout. He thrust Lightbringer skyward. The sword's flame guttered, but refused to die. Jon caught the hush lift, as though the sword drew breath for the city itself. "Tell me," Stannis rasped, "does your wall need a true king's fire?" Before Jon could answer, a sound like distant thunder rippled across sky. Drogon's roar echoed above King's Landing. Stannis's gaze snapped south. "1 dragon," he muttered. 3 were foretold. Where are the others? Jon followed the line of the king's glare. Below the horizon, the sky pulsed red, then blue, then green, as if gods tested colors for a new dawn. The hush thrummed between pulses. Jon felt it inside his skull and wondered if the hush was no silence at all, but the voices of every dead man chanting some incantation too ancient to parse. Stannis turned to the men behind. "To the ramparts. We scour each rung of shadow. No White climbs this wall by night or day." He looked to Jon. "Sing your words with mine, Lord Snow. Fire and ice together." Jon nodded. The oath of the Night's Watch fell from his lips, but in place of 7 gods, he imagined the faces of every brother who had died upon that wall in years past. Perhaps they now marched at the front of the hush, but if so, Jon would face them with sword bright. The Blackfish selected 6 archers whose lungs still fed them breath warm enough to mist. Jojen held the white candle between gloved hands while Mira knelt at the brazier they had stoked with tar, pitch, and old rosin from Riverrun's chapel organ. She struck flint above the mound. Sparks danced but guttered on the first contact with air. She struck again. A single spark landed square in the mound's heart, and the pile bloomed into nascent flame. Immediately the hush pounced, washing the courtyard with sudden chill that stilled the flame into a statue of solid orange glass. Mira swore, smashed at the crystallized fire with dagger pommel. Cracked and flame wriggled free anew, flickering madly. She cried out, thrust the white candle's wick into the fire. For a breath it remained dark. Then the candle caught, and when it burned with no normal flame, but a violet radiance shot through with spirals of green, spinning inside the wax like a whirlpool of light. The hush outside the walls shrank back. Mira felt it recoil as if light stung it. Jojen gasped, every wound in his side reopening, blood hissing into frost the moment it touched air. He clutched Mira's sleeve. Wait, only when you light the third do you draw them. There will be no time later, Mira said, and smashed the black candle's tip into the fire. It ignited in deepest azure. The final candle, the green one, caught with a flash white-hot, then shivered down to emerald. 3 candles burned. Their glow rose in twisting triple helix, knitting a column that soared above the keep. The hush screamed, not sound, but a vibratory tension that rattled teeth. Every corpse outside the wall jerked upright, faces turning. Archers, Brinden growled and loosed. Flaming arrows streaked into the sea of dead, each arrowhead trailing a thread of violet or green, lighting whites as though oil-soaked. The dead writhed, screeching now with real sound, sounds like bones on glass. The hush shattered, replaced by cacophony of cracking ice and burning sinew. For the first time since the Red Wedding there was noise, and that, Mira thought with bleak triumph, is the sound of hope. But the scream also beckoned. From clouds to the north, silhouettes swooped, things with tattered wings of ice, spines jagged as mountain ridges. IceWYRMS, older than dragons, wakened. Brinden saw them and muttered, "Mercy of the Seven." He signaled for the inner gate to be barred. Moat Cailin stood between Dragonfire and the last monsters of winter, and would not break before sunrise, if sunrise ever came. On Dragonstone, Davos Seaworth stood before the painted table, the map alive with red shadows cast by Melisandre's brazier. The Queen's men chanted prayers. Their voices pulsed with the hush, stuttering each time the hush pressed down. Davos studied the coastlines snaking across wood under candlelight and realized the geography he'd carved in childhood no longer applied. Winter had annexed half the realm. Rivers froze, forests died, mountains glowed with that strange aurora and shattered. How did one plot a course across a world gone still? Melisandre's face loomed beside his. The ruby at her throat glimmered. "Your king fights at the wall," she said. Davos nodded. He traced a finger southward. "And there, the Queen of Dragons burns King's Landing. 2 fires, 1 kingdom, but no path between while winter fills the gap." Melisandre's lips curved. "There is a path. Beneath the ice the fire still flows. The rivers run unseen, but they run. The Dragonfire awakens rivers of stone far below. When those rivers break the surface, winter's ice will crack like an eggshell." Davos eyed the ruby. "And when the shell cracks, then the world hatches." He exhaled through numb lips. "So much prophecy, so few ships. I will sail," he declared. "I'll find any fisherman still breathing and gather hulls. We'll carry refugees to Dragonstone, or to hell if need be." Melisandre cupped his hand. "You serve the light, Onion Knight, even in darkness." Her palm burned, but he did not pull away. In King's Landing, atop a charred spire of the Dragon Pit, Tyrion Lannister crouched with a crossbow he barely knew how to load. Below him, the Night King moved among collapsed pillars like a king surveying his garden. Drogon's flame had ceased. The dragon circled at altitude now, wings beating heavy, and Tyrion saw that ice studs crusted the membranes of his wings. Too much cold would bring even a dragon down. Tyrion figured there were 2 kinds of fools: those who rushed a monster head-on, and those who waited until the monster noticed them anyway. He had spent a lifetime as the latter, So when the Night King paused to spear a writhing wight who wore a gold cloak's mantle, in silent judgment or correction, Tyrion steadied the crossbow. The quarrel's tip was flint chipped from a Valyrian glass candelabrum he had shattered in the small council chamber. He did not know whether it would kill the King of Winter, but for tonight suspicion was enough. He exhaled, squeezed. The bolt flew, a flicker of black across gray sky. Time slowed. The hush thickened so palpably Tyrion felt his heartbeat stall. The bolt would strike between the armor plates at the Night King's ribs. It would. It must. A hand of frost snapped up with inhuman speed, caught the bolt in midair. The Night King turned, eyes locking on Tyrion's. The hush became presence, heavy enough to crush breath. Tyrion felt tiny veins freeze behind his eyelids. "Bugger," he whispered. The Night King crushed the bolt. Shards tinkled on stone. He raised his spear. Tyrion wheeled, sprinting across a beam no wider than a man's thigh. Slate tiles slid beneath his boots. Ice-cracked wood supports. He leapt, caught a chain, slid along it, skin ripping on links, and dropped to a balcony. The spear followed like lightning made solid. It pierced the balcony inches behind him, embedding in mortar so deep it hummed with lingering force. The hush roared inside Tyrion's ears, but he moved, scrambled, rolled. He had seconds, maybe less. Across the plaza, the gates of Maegor's Holdfast burst outward, and a flood of fleeing small folk swept onto the square. Cersei rode at their head astride a black charger, Tommen before her in the saddle. Qyburn ran beside, tiny legs pumping. Ser Gregor, no longer armored but wearing a shroud of chain and riveted plates blackened by some chemical, followed, sword wider than Tyrion's body clutched in corpse-white fists. The Night King pivoted. For the first time Tyrion saw interest flicker in the walker's crystal gaze. The monster moved toward Cersei. Tyrion glimpsed his sister's face, a mask of resolute terror. She saw the Night King. She did not slow. The hush pressed upon their confrontation like a giant's foot upon a brittle toy. Then an arrow, fletched gray with feathers from Ghost himself, pierced the Night King's pauldron. Harsh crack. He staggered half a step. On the balcony above Tyrion, a cloaked archer knocked another shaft. Sansa Stark, green eyes fierce, the hush rippling her hair like underwater kelp. How she had come south Tyrion could not fathom. Nor did it matter. She drew to her ear, loosed. Arrow 2 struck the Night King's brow and shattered in plume of sparks. Enough to distract. Drogon dived. Cracks, steam, roar. Dragon flame engulfed the Night King from shoulder to ankle. The hush shrieked, a wraith noise that tore banners from poles. Fire roared back. For a heartbeat Tyrion thought it done. Then the flames parted and the Night King remained, scorched but standing, spear raised anew. Crafted now of molten metal frieze welded into even harder ice. That spear pointed skyward. He hurled. Drogon banked, but the spear flew truer than gravity. It struck just behind the left scapula. Scale splintered. A spurt of black blood sizzled across rooftops. The dragon lurched, wings faltering, and Daenerys clung to spines slick with frost and blood. Tyrion's shout died in his throat. Hush swallowed it. Below, Ser Gregor roared, voice like sand grinding glass, and charged the Night King. Frost split chainmail, yet the giant did not slow. Sword rose, fell, met spear. Ice hissed where fire potion still clung to Gregor's blade. Each collision sent fractures radiating. Qyburn shrieked incantations, shards of pyromancer lore. Flames sprouted along the mountain's sword edge. Fire met ice head-on. For the first time, the Night King hesitated. Cersei reined up, eyes wide. Tyrion saw the chance. He vaulted parapet, skidded down slope of tumbled rubble. His ankle twisted, but he limped onward. At Plaza's center, the mountain staggered under frost. The hush closed. Tyrion drew a dagger from his belt. The onyx blade Samwell Tarly had pressed into his hand upon their parting at the wall, and hurled it at the Night King's exposed knee. The blade struck. Frost cracked. A fracture raced up through crystalline armor. The Night King's knee buckled. He stabbed spear into ground to brace. Just as Sansa loosed a third arrow, obsidian-tipped, plunged into the fissure. White flame erupted along the crack. The Night King looked up. Drogon came again, bleeding but furious. Fire vomited across spear and helm. The cracks widened, searing blue light inside like lightning in quartz. The hush screamed louder, a sound so pure Tyrion tasted iron on his tongue. Then the sound ceased. The Night King exploded in blizzard of shards so bright they eclipsed sun that wasn't there. Every shard dissolved to vapor before hitting ground. Silence followed. Not hush, but true absence of sound. Ears rang. Tyrion fell to knees, hands overhead. When he dared look, the dead across the plaza twitched, convulsed, and sagged as if strings were snipped. Yet the sky still boiled with aurora, and Ice Waramus screeched above the north walls. One king fallen did not end the winter. Daenerys guided Drogon over the square and landed near the ruins of the September. She dismounted, boots sliding in slush stained black with dragon blood. Tyrion limped toward her. Sansa climbed from balcony rubble, bow already knocked again. Cersei watched from horseback, Tommen clutched to her breast, tears freezing on her cheeks. The hush returned faintly, now a wounded whisper. Something else rose in its place. Rumble of ice fracturing across leagues, as though the Night King's demise sent a shockwave through every glacier he had claimed. Tyrion looked north. The aurora flickered. He felt the earth tremble. Jon Snow felt it too, atop the wall. Cracks raced along the horizon, a necklace of distant explosions. The dead still fought at the base, but their movements faltered. Limbs slowed, thrusts mistimed, as though puppeteers lost fingers. Jon glimpsed one walker atop a giant's shoulders. Its pale crystal crown flared bright, then guttered. The giant stumbled, toppled backward off the cliff, crushing ranks below. Brothers shouted, not terror but wonder. Did she do it? Dolorous Ed breathed. Someone did, Jon said. Yet the hush did not die entirely. He felt its echo in his chest. The gods naming a price. Ice Waramus screamed in fury where they circled above Moat Cailin. The candles there burned bright, but the creature's dove, spines carving the air. One Wyrm struck the outer wall and shattered into sleet, yet 8 more swarmed. Fire arrows spat upward, green and violet lit, painting streaks across night. Brynden shouted until his voice broke. Mira felt the candles quake. Wax melted like tears from the base. They would not hold. In the Dragon Pit Plaza, Cersei dismounted at last. She lifted Tommen, feet stumbling from wine and shock. She met Daenerys' gaze across the ruin. 2 queens measured each other while the world around them cracked like burning parchment. Tyrion stepped between. Later, he said, we live first. Daenerys' violet eyes threatened storm, but she nodded. We clear the city, gather near the river. Fire must meet ice on open ground. Cersei laughed, bitter. Fire and ice. Prophets still rule, it seems. Behind them, Gregor's blackened armor clanged. The giant remained upright though his helm had half melted, revealing skull mottled but animate. Qyburn fussed around him, adjusting tubing, muttering of quicklime to replace frozen blood. Tyrion eyed them, but the time for moral revulsion passed with dawn. If dawn ever returned. Above the ruins of Harrenhal, a column of gray wind coalesced. Within its core danced flecks of once flesh, white as ash. They spiraled, merged, condensed. A figure emerged, taller than man, crowned with horns of spectral ice. Where his face should be lay a mask of angles, eyes molten blue. The second Night King, born from fragments of the first. The hush obeyed him now, deeper, vaster. He opened his palm. The fragments of spear, arrow, and obsidian gathered from 100 miles flew into that palm, fused into a blade longer than any man was tall. He looked south, toward King's Landing ablaze with dragonfire and rebellion, then north, where a line of broken sky marked the wall and the fires of a strange sword. He looked west, where 3 candles burned, flickering but alive. He turned east, toward the sea where no ice flowed yet but would. His voice rolled like avalanche, a soundless command but mighty. Across frozen rivers, corpses jerked awake. Across haunted isles, krakens stirred in dark depths. In Valyrian ruins, stone beasts opened eyes of sapphire. The world still owed winter. The hush spread anew, but something answered it. A rumble below Dragonstone, deeper than any mine. Magma surged where once only embers slept. Melisandre felt it through her sawls. Davos felt it through ship's keel. And in Meereen, far across a narrow sea gone to mist, two dragons shackled beneath Great Pyramid roared. First time since Daenerys crossed the water. Chains snapped like icicles struck by hammer. In the Red Keep Plaza, Drogon's wounded chest heaved. Daenerys pressed brow to his muzzle. "One of three," she whispered. Sansa knelt beside Cersei, unfastened her cloak, wrapped it around shivering Tommen. Tyrion watched in astonishment. Queens, mothers, widows, all stripped of power by same hush. In war, nature often leveled crowns and commoners alike. But this war promised something stranger. An armistice born of fear shared across thrones. Above, shards of shattered sky drifted like luminous snow. Hours later, if hours meant anything where sun refused, Stannis joined Jon atop the wall's gatehouse. Lightbringer flickered less bright, but still bled radiance into wind. Jon pointed south where Aurora throbbed. "When that light dims," he said, "we march. The dead weaken, but not fall." Stannis nodded, frost stiff on beard. "Fire must cross the realm. I will lead men through the King's Road. You take the dead men who still live, these Stark kings risen anew. Led them home, to purge the rot at its root." Jon breathed in hush, then exhaled. "Will you trust a Stark?" Stannis looked to horizon where Second Night King gathered storms on high. "I trust flame that burns true. Steel your heart with fire if need be. This land is yours more than mine." They clasped wrists, cold iron to warm leather. Above them, a raven circled, wings ragged, eyes no longer blue but black once more. Cawed, harsh and real. Jon raised his arm. It landed, talons pricking. Around the raven's neck a strip of parchment fluttered. Words inked in Bran's angular scrawl. "Remember, the heart of winter beats beneath the trident."
Jon met Stannis' gaze.
"The trident," he said. Stannis drew breath. Where the boy king fell. Memory of Robb Stark as white flitted across Jon's mind. He shivered. "Then we break winter where it was born anew. We'll need dragons. And fires that never burn out," Stannis added. Jon looked south to glow of Dragonstone's magma rising, then west to candlelight swirling above Moat Cailin. "Then we gather every ember, and pray ember becomes dawn." The hush rumbled a low warning. Somewhere, Ice WYRMS shrieked anew, streaming westward. The war had paused only to draw a deeper breath. But for the first time since the Red Wedding, when hush first stalked banquet's last note, men spoke hopeful as well as fearful. Candles burned, swords gleamed, dragon wings shook frost from pinions. Somewhere in darkness Qyburn's chimera learned to wield flame that froze. Somewhere a boy king clung to a lioness's breast and felt her heartbeat thunder his own defiance. The hush listened, heavy with promise. And far beneath Earth's cracked crust, something ancient opened one red eye, tasting ice in its lair, feeling heat above. It stirred, and the hush shivered back. Battle waited, but so did dawn. Dawn sown by obsidian and dragonfire, by dead kings reclaiming swords, by silent oaths sworn atop walls of ice. Whether dawn found foothold or failed, no soul could yet know. The hush would decide when to speak again. The dawnless sky smoldered violet when Jon Snow led the first column south from Castle Black. Each breath of his stallion hung in the air as silver vapor before curling into the pulsing aurora overhead. At his sides rode Ser Davos Seaworth and Val, the spearwife Bran had once called sister of the free folk. Behind them spilled 2,000 black-cloaked brothers, 300 spearwives, 400 Karstark and Mormont men who had crossed the shivering sea on ice skiffs, and a spectral honor guard of 20 old Stark kings clad in barrow iron. their eyes twin coals of smokeless blue-white flame. When the gates closed behind the host, Jon studied the figures of those kings. They neither spoke nor gave sign of pain, but he felt them listening, fierce as hounds awaiting a whistle. No wind stirred the direwolf standards they bore. The cloth lay heavy as chainmail, frost rhyming every thread. Yet the dire wolves upon those banners seemed almost to breathe, jaws parting just enough to bare stone fangs. Jon wondered whether his ancestors recognized him, or whether some fragment of the hush that had seized their souls answered only to the boy who had once knelt before their statues in Winterfell's crypts. South of the gift, the land was a tapestry of ruin. Stands of birch lay splintered as though pounded flat by an unseen mallet. Lakes gleamed like shattered obsidian, their surfaces frozen into jagged plates that tilted upward where whole shoals of fish had tried to leap into air now harder than iron. When the rising sun should have gilded the white knife, it showed instead as a band of black glass, motionless from bank to bank. At midday the column crested a ridge and glimpsed Queen's Crown in the distance, but the Holdfast's lone tower no longer jutted from snowy pines. It had collapsed beneath the writhing roots of some monstrous weirwood whose branches were now encased in translucent ice, the sap within glowing faintly with stolen starlight. Jon felt the hush tremble through those roots like a harp string. The kings beneath their banners bowed their helms toward the tree, then marched on without slowing. Val broke the silence first. "Your dead walk like first men's shades," she murmured, her breath steaming. "Yet I do not fear them as I fear the hush. What sorcery binds the hush to this new Night King?" Jon shook his head. "I think even the three-eyed raven never saw that far back. But Bran sent word. The heart of winter beats beneath the trident. If we sever that heart, the hush will bleed away. Then we split it open," Val said, voice flat as steel. Hundreds of leagues away, in the courtyard of the Dragon Pit, Tyrion Lannister limped among knots of men shoveling the fragmented bodies of inert wights into pyres of pitch-soaked timber and cracked wagon wheels. The stench of charred flesh rolled over the city like a sour tide, but the watchman atop Aegon's high hill swore that smoke rising from these fires pricked holes in the aurora overhead, leaving patches of honest black sky through which stars glimmered for the first time in days. Sansa Stark helped treat survivors beneath a makeshift canvas alcove. She had traded her green velvet gown for a torn tunic and fur-lined men's breeches, the copper-eyed falcon of House Aaron sewn hastily over her heart with thread unraveled from a maester's cloak. In one hand she held a cup of mulled wine gone half-slush. In the other, the warbow she had loosed upon the Night King. Not once had she unclasped her fingers from the bow's grip since that arrow flew. It seemed a tether to courage she could not mislay lest grief claim her. Across the square, Daenerys Targaryen paced beneath Drogon's shadowed wing. A web of linen bandages crossed the dragon's chest where the ice spear's barb had entered and melted flesh to black glass before shattering. Kono the Dothraki stitched the hide with sinew as thick as a man's finger while Missandei dabbed melted obsidian along the wound. Qyburn's alchemy proved strangely useful once stripped of his darker humors. Drogon endured in brooding silence, Citron eye tracking every motion of his queen. Tyrion stopped before Daenerys, leaning on a broken spear haft. "I count maybe 10,000 small folk who can still move under their own power," he said. "Another 4 inside septs and cellars who may not last the night. Fresh waters turned salt with soot, foods half frozen or burned. If we march, many will die. We march regardless." Daenerys's gaze never left the northern skyline where black snow clouds discolored the horizon. "Jon rides for the Trident. If we leave that task to him alone, we will have no realm worth saving." Tyrion licked cracked lips. "And if we leave these people?" Sansa answered, voice hoarse but resolute. "You shepherd them south past Storm's End. I will ride with the dragon and the queen." Tyrion swung toward her, incredulous. "You, my lady? You have burned through one war already. Your court in the Vale is not yet secure." "My brother and mother lead the dead," Sansa said. "I will not stand aside while strangers defend their souls. Nor do I trust the second Night King to spare the Vale for its lofty heights." She turned to Daenerys. "Give me Rhaegal." Bran said the dragons would answer wolf's blood. Daenerys regarded her. Regal and Viserion remained chained beneath Myreen's pyramid, a fortnight's sail at best. Then summon their riders by Raven, Tyrion said. In such darkness, even a fortnight can carve the fate of a generation. We need wings now. Daenerys nodded. Ser Jorah has sailed already with 50 Unsullied on the fastest galley remaining. The wind that carries him was born of fire in Dragonstone's vents. If Regal reaches the Trident in time, Winter may find its match. She left unsaid what all three understood. Viserion was not promised. The pale dragon had shown unpredictable fury even when shackled, and the Hush's lure might twist him. On the misty Isle of Faces, through swirling drifts of spectral snow, Meera Reed crouched beside the guttering candles. Each flame bent eastward as though seized by an insistent tide. The ice WRMS circling overhead had begun to shed pieces of themselves. Scales like dagger-shaped hailstones shattered against the weirwood's white trunks. Each impact flickered a pulse of green or violet light along the roots, as though the tree drank the WRM's cold and converted it to fire. Brynden Tully kept watch beside her, a notched glaive in his grip. "We cannot hold," he said. "WYRMS no patience. Each pass erodes the wood, and when roots break, the Hush will rush through faster than spring flood." Meera wiped blood from her brow. Some her own, some not. "We have one recourse." Jojen saw it. The heart of Winter beneath Trident must be pierced by living fire. The candlelight is only beacon, not blade. The Blackfish nodded. He kissed the blade of his glaive and shouted orders. Archers knocked their final obsidian-tipped shafts, waiting for the next stoop of the lead WIRM. When icy wings cast shadow over the bailey, every arrow loosed in a staggered ripple. Most shattered on the creature's armored hide. One lodged between scales at the collar, erupted in violet flame. The WIRM shrieked, careened skyward, trailing sputtering embers that burned holes through its membrane. The other WIRMS howled answer, cold thunder that rattled the islet to its foundations. They banked south, streaming as jagged comets toward the Trident where their master's call now rang like a bell of doom. Meera watched them recede, then pressed a hand to her side where the Hush had left a patch of skin numb as marble. "Beacon holds," she whispered. "Now the blade must find its mark." Where the Kingsroad met the Green Fork, three armies converged. Robb Stark's Whites, thousands strong, marched beneath ragged direwolf banners, but they halted at sight of Stannis' torchlit ranks. For a heartbeat both forces faced each other. The living braced for slaughter, the dead frozen in tableau. Then the Hush rippled through Robb's host like a stone skipping across water. First the red cloak of a dead riverlord snagged in wind, next a motionless halberd dipping, at last 100 swords lowering in unison. Robb Stark stepped forward, ice crust faintly melting where Lightbringer's glare fell upon him. Stannis advanced, sword burning red. Between them stretched mud frozen into glass. Stannis thrust his blade into the ground. Fire hissed around the steel, steaming a tiny circle of liquid earth. He spoke in measured tones. "Your cause is justice. Mine is duty, yet both bow before life. Will you stand with us to end the Hush that enslaves you?" Robb's mouth opened, a creak like water forcing through glacier cracks. Words emerged hoarse, almost human. "What price?" Stannis looked behind him at Melisandre, who stood with gloved hand upon Davos's shoulder. "A king's life," Stannis answered. "It is always a king's life." Robb turned his head slowly toward the direction of the Frey lands, as though seeing across leagues. Then he bowed from the waist, crown of ice splintering as it touched breathed warm air, and his host knelt behind him, weapons flat on ground. The Hush shrank away as if bereft of breath. Val rode forward stiffly, her spear crowned by a torch. "You bargain with death itself." Stannis retrieved his sword. "Death deals on its own terms. If we cheat it once, we pay double next sunrise. Let us hope we pay in my coin, not the realms." That night, the combined armies camped at the fork of the Kingsroad. The living pitched tents around braziers. The dead clustered where frost met fire, kneeling in circles that resembled graves newly dug. No words passed between them, Yet watchers swore the white's empty sockets flicked brighter whenever flames crackled. Some believed the dead warmed themselves on memory. Others whispered that they parsed flame's language, listening for commands their freed minds no longer wished to obey. Jon Snow arrived at first light. His force of watch and free folk merged with the growing host. When he rode beneath the dire wolf banners of the dead, he expected dread but felt only grief. Gray Wind's white padded at Robb's heel, smell of frozen marrow trailing in its breath. At sight of Jon, the beast's ears pricked, head tilting. Jon extended a gauntlet hand. Icy muzzle touched his glove before the wolf returned to stillness. Robb watched. His hollow eyes glinted. "Brother," he said. Voice scraped like metal on stone, yet recognition lived in that single word. Jon clasped his forearm. Cold shot through his veins, but he did not release. "All of us or none," Jon vowed. Robb breathed a sigh that cracked hoarfrost along his lips. "All," he agreed. The trident awaited. From Maidenpool to Saltpans, the river valley lay under siege of unnatural weather. Snow deep as castle walls choked the fords. Where water still ran it smoked like some witch's cauldron. Surface scabbed by instant ice that snapped beneath its own weight. Small hamlets appeared as cairns. Roofs buried, hearth fires out, frozen silhouettes huddled in doorways or under wagons. The hush here radiated palpable dread. Birds lay silent on branches. Their hearts burst from sudden frost. Oak trunks split with pistol cracks, but no echo followed. And yet, across that barren expanse, something pulsed unseen. A far-off heartbeat dredging warmth from depths below earth. The first to sense it were the Stark Kings. They lifted their helms to the wind as hounds scenting quarry. Next Drogon felt it. Above the army he roared skyward, flame jumping from his jaws not as weapon but greeting. The pulse answered. The river's ice plates shook. Plumes of steam tore free like banners ripped from flagstaffs. "It calls to the flame," Melisandre whispered, eyes reflecting aurora. She walked to where Lightbringer stood planted in snow, both gloved hands clasping its hilt. "Beneath these waters lies the heart, from before men, before giants. A scar of falling star that drenched the earth in red fire. The first children buried it in cold silt. Now winter aims to reclaim." Jon knelt at river's edge. Under torchlight he saw a glint of black rock in the ice. It formed a jagged vein across the streambed. Obsidian like the dagger that felled the first Night King. He looked up at Stannis. A sword of star rock made the heart. A sword of man must unmake. Stannis tugged Lightbringer free of snow. The blade roared louder. "Then point me where to strike." Before Jon could speak, a screech tore across sky. The Ice WIRMS swooped, their numbers thin from Moat Caelin's defense but still 7 strong. They dived upon camp before horns could sound. One WIRM impaled itself on the hastily raised spears of the unsullied wedge, yet its bulk crushed 3 ranks, freezing men to ground beneath its dying weight. Another snatched 2 Stark Kings in jaws spined with frozen basalt. Sheared in half, the Barrow warriors crumbled to powder rather than bleed. Gray Wind sprang, jaws locking round a WRM's throat. Frost burst outward, but the dire wolf held long enough for Melisandre to fling a clay pot of wildfire into the creature's mouth. Emerald fire blossomed. The WRM thrashed, wings sawing tents in half before sliding into the river where flame met obsidian veins in a chain of detonations that sent geysers of vapor sky high. For an instant the hush fractured, replaced by chaotic roar. Jon mounted a rise and raised Longclaw. Archers, obsidians, arrows arced. Green and violet tips traced comets. 2 WIRMS spiraled earthward furred with dancing lights before shattering against frozen ground. The remaining creatures climbed, screeching grievances of ancient glacial years. Their departure left camp half in ruins but alive. Stannis strode among wounded. Lightbringer pulsed, every heartbeat sending a ripple through the obsidian veins beneath ice. The pulse from below answered now in rhythm, a conversation of heat and stone. Melisandre cried out, falling to knees. Around her the snow melted, revealing charred earth that steamed yet refused to cool. She dug bare hands into slush, retrieving a shard of glossy red glass. "A piece of the heart," she breathed. She gave the shard to Davos. It vibrated with internal life. Davos felt warmth seep through his glove, though air still froze spit before it hit ground. Jon stared at shard, then at obsidian-laced river. "It is waking," which means the second Night King nears. At that moment, war horns blared from the western hills. Sellsword scouts thundered back among the ranks, shouting of a new host. Armored giants of ice, kraken wights dragging nets of drowned corpses, herds of elk frozen into living statues harnessed to bone sledges. At the host's center rode the second Night King astride a drake of transparent crystal. Within its throat flickered captured starlight that bathed the plain blue. Robb Stark took a knee beside Jon. Ice cracked. "We stand," he rasped. Jon clasped his dead brother's shoulder. "We stand." The armies aligned. Northmen and free folk on right, Stannis' Southron spears on center, Barrow Kings and Whites willing to defy their new master on left. Behind them Daenerys vaulted onto Drogon's back. The dragon beat once, twice, then rose trailing sparks. Arrows of burning pitch lofted to mark her ascent. The hush deepened as the second Night King halted his line, crystal drake's claws gouging furrows through ice shelf. Across the distance he raised a scepter forged of fused spear shards. At its tip rotated a knot of shattered obsidian suspended within ice that refused to melt. He plunged the scepter into the river. Instantly the ice under Stannis' feet shattered outward in a ring. Black water boiled around plague-white shards. Figures clawed from depths. Shapes half water, half corpse. Dragging ropey kelp that encircled ankles, wrists, throats. Living and dead together were hauled toward sloshing maw. Stannis wrenched Lightbringer in two-hand grip and plunged it into the water. Fire roiled from the blade's fuller, spreading across surface like oil aflame. The water froze and then burst, ejected in pillars that vaporized mid-air. The scepter's glow wavered. Ice WRMS screeched anew but would not cross Lightbringer's heat. Robb lifted a horn carved decades earlier from a mammoth tusk. Its mouthpiece had broken, yet he pressed it to colorless lips and blew. No sound issued. Instead, a wave of terrible silence rolled across the field. Where it passed, every corpse under hush faltered. The second Night King's drake recoiled, wings fracturing. The king turned his head with jolt of rage. Chips of ice shed from his crown. Daenerys chose that moment. Drogon stooped headlong, flames streaming like comet tail. The crystal drake opened its maw, exhaling a jet of pure, shimmering cold that solidified droplets mid-flame, fusing them into shards that rained downward. But Drogon's fire contained fragments of R'hlloreth's gift, sparked by Melisandre's ritual. At the heart of the torrent burned a core of white gold hotter than forged suns. Where that core met cold, matter screamed. Cracks spidered along the drake's torso. Its belly shattered like glass hammered from within. It plummeted, the second Night King leaping clear in an explosion of splinters. He landed on riverbank 100 paces ahead of Stannis. Jon spurred his horse, Longclaw raised. Beside him galloped Val with a free folk wedge, and Sandor Clegane swinging Gregor's reforged black blade wrapped in burning chains. Robb's whites lumbered behind in thunderous stampede. The second Night King swung his scepter. A wall of ice spears burst from earth, impaling the first rank, skewering horses. Sandor's mount folded. The hound rolled, came up cursing, helm lost, hair aflame with witchfire. He hacked through spears, clearing path for Jon. Jon leapt from saddle onto a spear stalk, then to another, bounding until he reached the king. Their weapons clashed. Valyrian steel met meteor ice. Sparks of red and blue scattered like battling fireflies. Each blow reverberated down Jon's arms, numbness creeping. The king moved as if each motion rewrote gravity, weightless yet heavy with centuries. He thrust. Jon parried and riposted, drawing a shallow cut that smoked with steam. The hush throbbed, trying to crush Jon's lungs. Some instinct drove him to drop low as the king's backhand carved air above. When he straightened, he saw Lightbringer approaching in an arc of sunset gold. Stannis had come. The king crossed his scepter to block. Scepter and sword met, ice and fire locked, emitting a howl such as none living had heard. The ground beneath them liquefied. Obsidian veins glowed like hot steel. Now! Melisandre cried from cliff where she had climbed cranes perched. She raised the shard of red crystal toward sky. Light speared upward, piercing cloud pall. High above, the aurora split, revealing a circle of black studded with stars. Through that circle thundered a roar, regal, emerald wings pounding. Astride him rode Ser Jorah, face smeared in soot. Behind soared Viserion, unchained, riderless. But at his back clung Missandei, hair whipping like comet tail. Viserion shrieked, white flame blasting toward the battlefield. But Missandei steered his neck with twisted reins of scorched silk. The flame licked not the living ranks but the ice pillars shielding the Night King's flanks, turning them to rivers of fog. Regal folded wings, dived, green fire torrenting upon the scepter's embedded shard. The second Night King thrust a palm. A shield of diamond frost erupted. Jon yelled wordless defiance, drove Longclaw through the crack where shield met earth. Stannis hammered Lightbringer atop the same point, forcing steel downward. Beneath the riverbed, the obsidian vein shattered, exposing the heart fragment, a glowing orb of molten hematite. Melisandre's beam homed to that orb. The candlelight streaming from Moat Cailin met it along unseen lay. Somewhere deep within Winterfell's crypts, the kings of old bellowed a chorus of stone grinding stone. Jon seized the orb with bare gauntlet. Heat scorched through mail. He lifted it free, howling. The orb pulsed between scarlet and deepest blue. Stannis raised Lightbringer high. Flame spiraled along its fuller until the blade shone white. Together, Stannis rasped. Jon hurled the orb skyward. Stannis cleaved upward in perfect timing. Steel kissed Starrock. The orb split. From within erupted a spear of light brighter than daybreak. The hush wailed, then stopped. Stopped so completely that every warrior, living and dead, felt their own pulse deafen them. Light carved through the second Night King's crown, down spine, into earth. The king convulsed, scepter shattering. From every fracture in his body escaped swirling clouds of blue mist, racing skyward to merge with fleeing aurora. When the mist dissipated, only shards of clear ice remained, tinkling softly as they toppled into rivers' newly melted flow. A wind swept the field, warm, smelling of pine needles and wet soil. Snow on branches melted in one long sigh. Clouds parted to reveal the sun's disk, pale but rising. The hush was gone. In its absence came the clamor of life. Horses whinnying, men sobbing, crows cawing. Robb Stark stood head bowed, ice armor liquefying, flesh beneath turning gray. He looked at Jon. "Tell her I kept faith," he whispered. Skin sloughed, revealing bone, but in his eyes flickered ember of released spirit. He crumbled to dust, scattered upon water. Gray Wind's white collapsed beside him, a faint whine escaping before Skull split and fell silent. The remaining Barrow Kings knelt once more, helms set upon ground. Their eyes dimmed, then extinguished. Armor fell inward as if souls slipped away, leaving empty shells that collapsed like puppets whose strings were severed. None reached to catch them. Stannis planted Lightbringer in silt once warmer than winter ever should allow. His blade faded to dull steel. Davos approached, breath steaming though air grew mild. He asked the question that trembled on every lip. "Is it done?" Stannis looked to where molten obsidian dripped into river water, hissing. He looked skyward to the retreating ice Waramis, their forms unraveling into snowflakes that sparkled in rising sun. He sheathed the sword. "It is never done," he said. "But for this dawn enough." North of the field, Bran Stark opened his eyes within the Weirwood cave. The white of his irises flickered back to hazel. Bloodraven ceased his chant, sagging like a cloak on broken rack. Cold fled the cave's seams. Roots sagged, relieved of icy burden. Bran felt a lightness inside, as though a weight older than his bones had lifted. "They chose fire," the ancient whispered. Bran nodded. They chose each other. He listened to wind beyond cave mouth. It carried children's laughter from free folk camps, the creak of settling timber in Night's Watch towers, the crackle of torches no longer threatened. No hush, only life. Hodder squeezed Bran's shoulder. Bran smiled. Hodder, the gentle giant rumbled. A word now less burden, more greeting. At King's Landing the last whites toppled like scarecrows whose poles had snapped. Streets filled with water from thawing cisterns. Gutters carried ash and coal, but no blood now. Cersei knelt beside her son and felt warmth in his cheeks. For the first time since Robert's death, she closed her eyes without fear of waking to nightmare. Nearby, Tyrion sat on broken column, counting breaths. Across Plaza, Qyburn made notes on the inert corpse of Ser Gregor, perplexed by the giant's failure to move. Sansa handed Daenerys the bow she had carried. "You will need this more than I," she said. Daenerys shook her head. "Westeros decides its arms anew. You are of the north. Keep what you earned." She mounted Drogon, whose wound had ceased bleeding. Rhaegal and Viserion circled overhead, their shadows dancing across tiled roofs now steaming under first full sunbeam. "Where will you go?" Sansa asked. "Storm's End, then Dragonstone. We gather those who still have breath and rebuild. Winter may return. Some say it never leaves entirely. So we will build hearths too hot for Hush to enter." Sansa nodded, eyes glistening. "Then send word to Winterfell. A Stark will answer, fire or frost." On the banks of the Trident, Jon Snow stood alone where fallen kings had dissolved. He knelt, collected a handful of muddy water mixed with obsidian sand. He let it slip through fingers, and as sunlight struck the grains they flashed every color of dawn. Val approached, arm in sling. "The wall still stands," she said. "Wildlings speak of forest thawing. Some think it sign we may finally roam south without chains." Jon rose. "South belongs to all now. If we've learned anything from Hush, it's that walls only postpone debts." He turned to her. "I will ride north with those who wish return. Then I will come south again when spring root breaks ground."
Val Grigned.
"Spring," she echoed, as though testing flavor of forgotten fruit. From the ridge Stannis watched them. At his side stood Melisandre, face pale but eyes alive. "We have seen prophecy bent," the king said. "Men died, kings died, but realms survived free. Tell your god I have seen enough fire." Melisandre's smile held sadness. "Fire shows never lies, but it need not burn always." Stannis almost smiled. Then he limped toward his waiting horse. Behind him Davos threw the shard of red glass into river, where it hissed and vanished. Not far downstream, Arya Stark rinsed blood from needle. Sandor leaned on his sword, brow furrowed. "That Hush better stay dead," he muttered. "I'll not spend another winter listening for silence louder than bells." Arya flicked water at him. "No Hush could outtalk you." She sheathed needle and looked west, where the sun now painted bands of gold over barley fields revealed beneath melting drifts. "That's the sound I missed most," she said. "What sound?" "Fields waking." She shut her eyes and listened. Thaw dripping, crows cawing, wind carrying scent of damp earth. Music of life. Sandor snorted.
I prefer ale.
Arya laughed. A clear, bright noise that startled birds into flight. Far across the narrow sea, upon the deck of a Myrish cog bound for Volantis, a man in tattered black, no longer young, scarred across face by ice, rolled a dragonglass paw between calloused fingers. Jaqen Hagar watched him from shadows. "Do you still hear Hush?" Jaqen asked. Gendry Baratheon shook his head. "There's only echo." He held the paw up. "In the hammer's fire, I mean to forge it into something new. A gift for a wolf? A gift for a realm that forgot how to listen until silence scared it straight." Jaqen's lips curved. "A man hopes steel may remember." He stepped away, leaving Gendry to gaze at horizon where storms once brewed, now lit by unburdened sky. And in the citadel at Old Town, Samwell Tarly dipped quill and recorded. On the day the hush broke, the rivers of Westeros breathed steam, the dead spoke, and the living remembered why hearts beat warmer than snow. He wrote until candle guttered, then carried book to kiln where wildling glassmiths melted obsidian sand into panes for new greenhouse roofs. Seeds waited, he thought. Spring would require glass strong enough to hold warmth but clear enough for light. He placed quill upon sill, and for first time since arriving felt no fear of soundlessness. Outside, bells pealed, joy clattering off every tower, from White Harbor to Lannisport.
No has chancer.
Only living hearts, only dawn.